Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We're going to talk about chapter 11 of The Sun Also Rises. So, on the surface, there really isn't a whole lot to chapter 11. It really comes across as really sort of a transitional chapter where our whole goal really just seems to be getting Jake and Bill from Pamplona to their fishing spot, right, in the mountains of Brigitte and at the end. But there are still a couple of key things that I think are important to review and important to discuss when it comes to this chapter. We continue to see this theme regarding a simple exchange of values, so to speak, right? That one thing is given, and in exchange, something else it comes back in return. Primarily we see it a lot with Bill, and we saw it before they left Paris, and it continues here in this chapter as well when they are on the bus with the Basque people. One of them says, "You can't get this in America, eh?" And Bill very nonchalantly quips, "There's plenty if you can pay for it," right? That's sort of if you can pay for it, right? If you can have that exchange. That's a contrast, I think, from what they're experiencing, not just in Paris, but also especially in Spain, whether it's in Pamplona or now with the Basque, right? There isn't necessarily that simple exchange of values. Um, now, this theme continues, right, with Jake's interaction with the innkeeper when Jake believes he's being overcharged for their room. And she replies to him that, well, this is the summer, it's the busy season. And Jake realizes, well, we're the only ones here, so you're really kind of attempting to, you know, pull one over on us. However, Jake asks her if that includes the wine, and she says yes. And so there's this attempt on the part of Jake and Bill to sort of compensate for how they feel they've been wronged, right? They've been overcharged, and so at dinner, right, they help themselves to a significant amount of wine and liquor in an attempt to kind of compensate. But I think it poses an interesting question because in reality, though, are we always compensated when things go wrong, right? When we get the short end of the stick, when we get a raw deal, is there usually a way to make up for that? And I think the short answer is no. And I think Hemingway very much would have been uh, aware of that and certainly sort of would have advocated that way of thinking. And so we have to wonder why then have this moment, right, where Jake and Bill seem to get some sort of compensation. And I think it should raise really more of a question than an answer to us and thinking, well, are they really truly getting any sort of compensation? And is it really even about, the money, so to speak? Is the experience that Jake and Bill are having, is it worth more uh, than though the innkeeper is charging or the money spent or the time devoted to it, that kind of thing. I think in this chapter, we can also take a look more concretely at Hemingway's writing style. When he describes things, and I've mentioned this before, the emphasis is on concrete details. And I think we can kind of trace that back to his early days as a newspaper reporter, as a newspaper correspondent. And I think this really comes through in this chapter with regards to the weather once they get to the inn. It's really cold, and Hemingway goes out of his way to reinforce this weather and how cold it is for them. And I think if you really pay attention to it, you really get the sense, or you can almost feel just how cold it is. Whether it's the sweaters Jake and Bill are wearing, visible breath, right? When Bill blows his breath towards Jake, to kind of show him how cold it is. The steaming pitcher of hot rum punch, the hot vegetable soup, the sound of the wind, all of these very specific details contributing to that general effect. And I think that's a big part of Hemingway's style. He doesn't go into these very flowery descriptions about the weather, the bone chilling coldness, or anything like that. Just very specific, concrete details, all sort of building this impression about just how cold it is. And finally, we get more of Hemingway's dark humor in that he's constantly, but he's generally doesn't pass up an opportunity to sort of make fun of Jake, right, in his impotence. And of note in chapter 11, on the way to Brigitte, they see two teams of mules. Now, if you were just plowing through the reading, you may not have even have noticed it or may not have paid attention to it or, yeah, maybe just glossed right over the fact that they passed the team of mules and wonder what that was about. But how could we possibly consider that a joke or an insult? And I guess it all depends on how much we know about mules. Some of us may not be aware, but mules are impotent, right? Oftentimes, mules are sterile. They can't reproduce. And of course, neither can Jake. And obviously, mules, typically we think of them as a sort of beast of burden, if you will, right? Um, Dragging, carts and things of that nature. And so, does that fit Jake? Is Hemingway, sort of very subtly, nonchalantly, indicating to us that Jake is sort of this beast of burden, perhaps dragging the baggage of his friends, etc., etc. More to think about as we continue on through book two and through the rest of the novel.